My name is Roy Wetherall. I'm one of the founding engineers at Alfresco, and my current role is as the Records Management Engineering Lead. And I'm also the person standing between you and the party. So to prevent any kind of stampeding or throwing, I will be as rapid as I can, but without leaving out too much information. About 18 months ago, I relocated to Sydney, and I survived for 18 months on sunshine, beer, and barbecues, and I came back to England a week ago, and I got a cold. So I do apologise again for my croaky voice, but there's a reason I left Europe, clearly. So what we're going to do today is take a brief sort of glimpse into the future. So how many of you have seen Alfresco's records management product, either 1.0, 2.0, 2.01, anything? Okay, that's cool. And how many people know anything about records management? Okay, all right. That doesn't really help, actually, does it? So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the future. We're going to talk about what we're calling records management 2.1. Tomorrow, Kevin Dorr is going to give a presentation on 2.0 and give you a heads up on what's happening in that. So if you are interested about what's happening today, that's the thing to go and see. This is to give you a glimpse into the future. We're going to talk about basically what records management means very quickly and what we mean by transparent records management to give you a kind of a baseline to understand what we're trying to achieve. And we're going to take a quick look at the issues that face both Alfresco's current offering and records management in general. And then we're going to look at what's next. And part of that, the sort of the highlight, if you like, is a demo where I'll show you a prototype of what we're going to do. Okay. So I do apologise if this is a bit simplistic for those of you that probably know way more about records management than I do, and there's quite a lot of people in the world that do. But to give you a kind of a point of reference, I'm going to take just a couple of minutes to go take you through a sort of records management 101. And the example I'm going to use is hopefully something everybody can relate to, and that's, well, this is actually my letterbox, okay? Everybody in this room receives letters through your door every day. And what we naturally do, well, if you're anything like me, first off you look for the bills, because those are the ones that you're expecting or you're trying to avoid. But you probably filter through all the junk and throw that in the recycler, obviously because you care about the environment. And then you look for maybe a letter from your mum or your paycheck or whatever else is exciting. And what we're really doing in that situation, obviously, is we're being flooded with these bits of physical content. Some of them are important, some of them aren't. Okay? And in essence, that's really what records management is about. Okay? It's about determining which bits of content are important and which aren't. Okay, so a piece of content, or in this case a letter, is important for a number of different reasons. In the case of a bill, it's obviously important because we have to pay that bill, okay? And we have to make sure that we deal with that piece of that item of content. We have to process it in some way. But more importantly, we might decide to keep it. You know, we might keep it as evidence that we live at an address, or simply so that if the company phones us up 6 months later and say, "Where's my money?" you can turn around and say, "Well, I paid it on this date." Okay. You may receive a new driver's license, a new passport, and maybe a copy of your birth certificate, something that you might consider to be, you know, a piece of a record, effectively, of who you are, and you're likely to keep that forever. Yeah, think of a permanent record. Okay, and these things, what we tend to do. I mean, again, it probably depends how you run your letter incoming process, but I'll file these things. I'll go through the things. I'll read and throw away the things that are unimportant. The things that are important I'll deal with, and then those that I have to keep for whatever reason, be it for tax reasons, be it for sentimental reasons or whatever, I'll probably file in a little filing cabinet in my office. Okay, and obviously that gathers, you know, a huge amount of mail. I mean, I'm sure you can all relate to that. And over time, you may go to that place and purge that information. You go, well, do you know what? I really don't need bills from 7 years ago. I don't need, you know, 7 years worth of, you know, tax information. So you go out, you shred it, you know, because you don't want your identity stolen. And what you're really doing, again, is basically managing your personal records. And on a very simplistic kind of level, that's exactly what businesses do, or what records management is fundamentally about. Picking out the important content, keeping what's important, and then destroying it when you don't need it anymore. Okay? I mean, that probably oversimplifies records management because there are lots of different facets and there's lots of different ways that people look at it. But that's just to try and give you kind of like a little bit of a grounding or some sort of like real-world example or idea that you can sort of hold on to. Now, transparent records management is all about making that happen sort of, as we say, auto-magically. Okay? Records management has a reputation for, and I get teased a lot because I actually I'm quite enthusiastic about records management. I think it's actually quite an interesting area. It might make me strange, but it has a reputation for being boring, and it has a lot of different languages, different ways of expressing the same kind of meanings. And so people kind of switch off, and traditionally a lot of the solutions out there make it very difficult for people to do records management easily. So transparent records management is all about making it easy for the user, okay? Making the impact that records management processes have on the user as small as possible, okay? And in some respect, I mean, part of the reason I put transparent records management in the title of this is because that's about as buzzy as it gets at the moment, I suppose, in records management, okay? That's the kind of, the holy grail at the moment is sort of almost zero-touch records management sort of for the user, okay? And that's really what we want to try and do. There are products out there that attempt it, and I believe that Alfresco is in a unique position to have all the building blocks to make this actually achievable. So we're going to have a think about the things, why this sort of transparent approach is important. And really, I think this is the immediate first question. You've got to think about someone sitting at their desk. The example we're going to use later is like a customer service officer in a small manufacturing company. Okay, and they sit there and they have a job to do, and they work with content every day. Maybe they work with purchase orders, sales inquiries. Okay, and they know nothing about records management, and they just want to do their job. Okay, and in actual fact, the business just wants them to do their job because that's what they're paid to do and that's what they're good at. With the current Alfresco solution and a lot of the other solutions, the problem is that they have to know what's important. Okay, they have to be able to decide for themselves, is this purchase order important now? Should it be a record? When should it become a record? And all these kind of decisions. So what we want to try and do is actually kind of take that decision away from them. Okay, they don't need to know when it's important. It will just become important. Okay, so I kind of use the word important as opposed to record because in my head it kind of it seems a bit more intuitive in a way. And once they've decided whether or not this thing is important, they've got to know where to put it. And obviously an electronic system doesn't look quite like that, but in some respects it can be as daunting. If you look at some of the example file plans that the DoD push out and some of the other sort of, the metadata associated with some of the specifications, even for my eye, it's daunting to understand what that means. And for a user, it would be almost impossible and impractical for them to understand where they should put these particular records in this particular file plan. Okay? And in essence, we don't really want the user to have to know that. Otherwise, we're going to have to go and train the users and explain to them not only where they should put it, but why they should put it there and when they should put it there. Okay? So again, we want to take that decision away from the user. We just want the user to do their job and records management to kind of happen around them. Records, one of the things I didn't sort of allude to in that opening sequence when we're talking about the mail is it's very important. Once you've decided that something is important, that it's a record, that you need to keep it, that you need to make sure you know where it is. If a solicitor comes banging on your door, the tax man, I suppose in the example we're talking about, and says, "I don't believe your tax return. Can you please show me evidence of that?" You're instantly going to go to your filing cabinet And if you're organized, you're going to pull out, last year's information and go, there you go. If you're disorganized, like I have been in the past, you panic because you don't know where the hell it is. You don't know whether you threw it away. You don't know. You think you've stored some of it somewhere, but damned if you can find it. Okay. So recovery of this information, of these records, being able to find them quickly and efficiently is very, very important. Okay. In most cases, records are literally a record of what a business has done. Okay. And obviously, the classic example is the pharmaceutical company that's being sued over a particular drug. Okay. You can imagine the amount of important content and records that are associated, with that process of producing the drugs from the quality assurance and the way that they're manufactured and everything else. If a user of that drug tries to sue that company, they have to retrieve all that information very quickly and efficiently. And you don't want it to turn into, basically a Where's Wally or Where's Waldo kind of situation where you're scrabbling around trying to find this elusive piece of information. And I think at the end of the day, there is a job to do. And it isn't necessarily records management. It is, that individual sat in the office dealing with purchase orders. Okay? At the end of the day, the business has to record the important things that are going on, but it's not how they make their money. Okay? They make their money by doing what they do efficiently. So we don't want to stop people doing their job, but we do need to ensure that the records are captured and managed. Okay? And if you like, that really is the essence of, the essence of transparent records management. I've talked a lot about the user, but I haven't really talked about the poor records manager. And I do feel a bit sorry for them. I've met a few now, and they do seem to be, bless them, a bit sort of, underrated, and they do have a critical job in some organisations. And what you don't want them to end up having, very carefully, made sure that all this information is starting to flow through to the records managers. You don't want us to be buried under a pile of virtual paper, in our case. I should turn my scarf off, shouldn't I? So we need to make sure that they still have the control. By moving to this sort of transparent, fluffy, low-touch world, that the records manager is still in control, and he can still dictate when the records arrive and where they go, and he can still kind of keep them close, because I think that's what they like. Okay, the record is very precious to these people, and need to know where it is at all times. So if you like, that's kind of like a very kind of high overview of kind of what we're trying to generally achieve and why we're trying to achieve it. And what we're going to do is kind of have a look at a sort of quick step through of about 5 or 6 of the key features that we intend to add to the product to try and help bridge the functional gap that's currently there, so we can get close to this ideal. Now you probably, are anybody familiar with SharePoint records management offering? No? Yeah, okay, all right. So if you are, they also use this term in place. But it means a slightly different thing in Alfresco. So in the current 2.0 offering, when you make something a record, you have to effectively take it from its original location and place it in the file plan. And the file plan is what we call effectively the filing cabinet. Okay. Now that's fine. It becomes a record. It's controlled by the schedules. That's all good. The problem is that the poor user has absolutely no idea where that record's gone. Okay, and it's kind of lost its real life context, if you like. A purchase order is being worked on in the context of some working environment that suits those users. It becomes a record, and it sort of disappears and goes into some, strange filing cabinet somewhere. So in-place records management is about sort of maintaining that context. It's authoring context, if you like. So not only does it still retain some of its meaning, but more importantly, it means that the the users, the guys doing the job, working with these documents, can still find these things very easily, both via search, but also by browsing. And they kind of have the power, if you like, to say, okay, it becomes a record, I can see it, it's still in the context of my working environment, I can work with the documents and the new records, and at some point I can sort of say, now it's not relevant to my job function, it's become too old, I can just kind of hide it and it will go away. In reality, this thing has been shoveled into the file plan, is now under the control of the records manager. Okay? So that's what we mean by in place. We mean that we can take a document and literally just create it as a record, and that thing will light up. Okay? And from the user's point of view, that's all they really need to do. So that solves the problem of, context, where does it go, all that kind of stuff. What it doesn't solve is when do I make it a record? And that's when we're going to fall back on one of my friends at Alfresco, the rule. Okay. Because what you've got to remember is when we're talking about these in-place records, we're in a normal collaboration site. And in a normal collaboration site, we can create normal rules. I presume people are familiar with what a rule is in terms of Alfresco. It's fairly, I was going to say ancient. It's a fairly old concept. It's been around for a long time. It's well proven. So what we can do in this situation is essentially provide this new record action, okay, which is directly equivalent to pressing that button. But it means that we can now automate in that site when things become records. And those that are familiar with how rules work, you'll know that we've already got a fair chunk of conditions and actions that you can use. So it doesn't take a genius to imagine that it wouldn't be hard to create a record that says, when my purchase order, which is a particular type, in this case, I spelled incoming wrong, but whenever a document lands in this particular folder, if it's a purchase order, then it must become a record. Okay, but obviously you could make that as sophisticated as you like. So it could be, when the first major version is published, when it's tagged with important, if that's how you want to work. So it becomes quite a powerful tool, and it just falls back on the things that we're familiar with. So this is kind of like, if you like, the first half of the problem. This is, now we've got normal content becoming records, okay, automatically. And those rules are either, that's either happening manually by the users, but most likely the content administrator liaising with the records manager will have set the site up and then determine the rules that describe how those things become records and when they become records. So that's great. So they're all flowing towards the records manager now, and he's starting to get buried under a big pile of paper again. Because what we haven't done, for those of you who are familiar with what we currently do, is we haven't put those records anywhere. We haven't filed them. We haven't placed them in the filing cabinet. Okay? All we've done is kind of said, hey, records manager, this needs to become a record. And the records manager says, okay, I'll add it to my pile. Okay? And if you like, this is his his to-do list. So when something becomes a record in that way, it becomes, the slides and the demo kind of don't match because we haven't quite figured on the terminology. But it becomes a new record. Okay? In the demo, you see it's actually an unfiled record, which is actually more accurate, but probably not as user-friendly. Okay? And that literally means it is now under the control of the records management file plan. All the security and procedures have been applied to it, but it hasn't actually been placed in that cabinet yet. Okay, it's kind of in the to-do list of the guy who's got to file them. All right. So they're all sitting there and they're flowing in from all these content sites, and the records management team can decide, where do I file them, where do I put them, and they're filing them away. Obviously, mistakes are going to happen, or the records management team are going to disagree. So there's an option to reject them and send them back, maybe with a comment. There is also scope. I don't think we've got any examples of it on the slides. Oh, no, actually we do. I think it's later. Sorry, I'll come back to that. But this doesn't really solve that problem. You can imagine if you've got 1,000 sites or whatever, this poor guy is, well, you know, God forbid it's one guy, is going to have all these purchase orders and God knows what flowing into his kind of list that he's got to, you know, run around throwing into this filing cabinet. Okay. So again, we can fall back on my friend the rule, and we can allow the records manager to actually create rules that help to automatically file some of the things that are coming in. Okay. So again, sort of just to repeat myself, you've kind of got this two-stage process. You've got rules and automation flowing the records in, and then rules and automation flowing the records from the kind of to-do pile into the right slots. Okay, and that's the fundamental kind of the concept. So some of the examples you could imagine, it means that we can do things like automatically declare certain records that we know about. So declaration in our world means that this record is complete. We have all the information about it. We can set different property values, but most importantly, we can, like, you know, do this automatic filing. So we say if a purchase order comes in and the customer ID is a particular value, then it must go in this folder for this year. And if this year doesn't have a folder yet, then create one. Okay, so you kind of be able to use this again, this well-known kind of Alfresco paradigm of conditions and actions to build up, you know, automation of how these records are filed. So you can imagine now we've got a situation where the user can go about their daily job. They might, well, we'll see in the demo, they might, you know, major version a contract, and that will trigger a rule which will create it as a record, which will fall into here, and this will say it's a contract, file it in this particular folder for this year. Right? And the user's really done nothing but their job, and instantly the thing has become a record, and it is now filed and secure, and it will be held for, you know, until the deal is closed, and then held for 2 years and destroyed. Okay, as an example. Okay, so in that way, you can imagine that you can take an existing Alfresco repository and apply, you know, this RM 2.1 and build your rules and regulations about how content should become important and become records, and the user really doesn't have to do very much other than keep working. The last thing to mention is that often, you know, these things will flow in to the records manager, and sometimes I'll look at them and go, well, what's this? Okay, so this declaration step, after there's kind of filing, which is put in the right location, which classifies it and gives it a schedule for disposition. The other step is to declare it, which kind of says, you know, this thing is complete in terms of I know everything I need to know to kind of file it as a record, essentially, or keep it as a record. But often the records manager may not know the context in which this document has been created. They may not even understand really why it's a record. So this request for information kind of gives them the opportunity to have this sort of feedback loop. So it means that they can draw the users back into the process, probably using workflow in this case, and kind of actually request additional information, the user via a form or just informally, so that basically using workflow means that we can kind of, you know, the records manager can kind of claw the user back in when they need them without kind of having to, you know, them to do anything special other than check their inbox and follow the instructions. Okay. So this is the scary bit for me. Being an engineer, I'm naturally cynical, so I just presume everything won't work. What I'm going to do, let's see, okay, so how are we doing? Not too bad. So what I'm going to show you is essentially a prototype of 2.1. This was done so that we could kind of, we do this kind of thing just to iron out some of the technical details so we can estimate better. But it was actually quite a useful communication tool for what we're going to do. So in this scenario, we're going to pretend that we're a customer service officer in a small manufacturing company. And I apologize if anybody is familiar with this industry sector. I kind of made this up, so hopefully it's not too bad. But in this situation, the customer service officer is responsible for dealing with purchase orders. They'll take the purchase order in, they'll consult with the kind of the sales system that they've got, they'll fill in the details, send the confirmation back to the client. Okay. They'll also deal with inquiries relating to orders that have been placed. So if we log in as Michelle, who's one of these customer service officers, you can see that she's a member of the customer service site. Okay. Now, there's nothing special about this site. It's a regular site. And the way that they decide to work in this team is that they have their purchase orders, and everybody in the team has their own folder. Okay, and that's just so everything in that folder is their sort of like their working day, if you like, the stuff that they have to sort out. So what we'll do is let me just find the files. I've got some. So if you can imagine, we're just gonna drop these purchase orders. Okay. Okay. There you go. So we just dropped a couple of purchase orders in here, and what we'll see is if we have a look at the properties of this, we've got a few extra properties because we've customized the system. Again, I should hasten to add this. Again, we're not at the records management bit yet. This is kind of Michelle doing her job, if you like. So, her job then is to enter in, the order ID for that, cross-reference that with the customer ID, put in the order quantity, and then with all that information, pop in the delivery date. Okay. And what I'll do is very quickly, I'll just fill in the same information for this. Just to give you, so we've got a couple there. Okay, so then the next thing they do is they're gonna wander off. They're gonna print out the sales confirmation and send that back to the customer. And just to mark that in here, they're just gonna say, okay, well the sales confirmation has been sent. Obviously, you can imagine that this would be far more integrated. I obviously didn't want to spend sort of 2 months writing an integration with the sales product that I didn't understand. So what's happened behind the scenes is this thing has now become a record, because what the guy who manages this site has decided that when we've sent the sales confirmation, effectively that purchase order has been dealt with, and it's something we need to keep. Okay, and so as far as Michelle's concerned, this needs to become a record. She's got limited access to this. She can still edit the metadata because the records manager may come back and say, I can't declare it because there's some information missing. But yeah, there's very little that she can do with it now, whereas obviously she can proceed with this one, and we'll just make that a record as well. There you go, and that just happens in the background, so when we refresh. Okay, so they're both records. So you can see that, she's just doing her job, and if you like, things are happening around her. Okay. Obviously, excuse me. You can imagine that most people in that sort of working environment pretty much sit in email all the time. They may have purchase orders coming in via email. They might have, and obviously they'll have a lot of inquiries via email. Now in 2.0, the only way to really do records management in this kind of environment is to expose, using the IMAP kind of integration, the actual file plan itself, which is completely impractical. You don't want to actually expose the file plan to a user in their email. That's like super crazy, okay? Because how would they know what to do? So in this particular case, Michelle's received a purchase order in her email, so she's going to pop it in her working directory. Hopefully this will work. There you go. And we're just using the drag and drop IMAP stuff to do that. Again, nothing to do with records management, but the point is that obviously by dragging that in there, all the rules that we've set on that site will kick into play. Okay. If we went and looked at that now and edited it and checked the sales confirmation, it would become a record. Okay. Again, a nice feature again, which we kind of get for free. If you imagine, if we go back to the inbox, actually there's a draft here, I think. Hopefully that'll work. So she's received a question about dispensing of a particular, what happens when you do X, Y, and Z. She can reply. and she's obviously going to, she's replying to herself, but hopefully you won't notice that. But you can see she's also replying to inquiry at temp.com. Temp.com is actually my Alfresco repository running on here. And what I've done is I've used the email mapping stuff. I don't know if you've seen that. You can actually map inbound emails to a particular directory with an email alias. Okay. So if I send that off, we should see. There you go. You can see that's just arrived in that via email sales inquiry directory here. Okay, which is all fine. That's nothing special about that. But then when we come back into the site and we go into this sales inquiry, we'll see that that's automatically become a record. We've kind of said, well, look, if you're forwarding it to this address, so when you reply, make sure you CC it to this address, and we're keeping a record of all the responses you're giving our customers. Okay. So that's all well and good. So let me just, if I log in as the customer service manager, I think I've done it. Okay, we can quickly just have a look at how we achieve that. I doubt it will become as any surprise, but if we have a look, you can obviously, you're familiar with the little directional arrow there that tells you whether or not there's rules on this particular folder. If we quickly just jump into the manage rules, you can see I've added 2 rules onto this. One to create purchase orders, so I downgrade it to my purchase order type, so I get all the new properties. But I also have a rule that says, when the sales confirmation has been set, just make it a record. Okay. So that's all well and good. So we've got our records kind of being created around our ears. We're doing our job. We don't have to worry about, when it should be created. Oh, this is what I can't talk and type. When it needs to be created, or where it needs to be put. Oh, sorry, I attempted to talk and type, and I can't do 3 things at once, I'm afraid. Record manager. Okay. My mental note there is to pick a shorter password in demos in future. So I've logged in as the records manager. And before I do anything, just to kind of show there's nothing up my sleeve, if I go and search for the sites, you'll see that as a records manager, I can't see that content site. It's private to me. Okay. I have no idea, and that's just, and it's kind of proving the point at this point, right? What we're trying to achieve is potential isolation for the records management team from the content and the content team from the records managers. All right? And we can achieve that with this kind of strategy, okay, with this almost this sump in the middle. Now, obviously, you don't have to work like that. You can cross the 2 teams over, but you have the option to keep things separate. So if we go into the records management site, as a records manager, you should see that we've got a number of undeclared records. We got the purchase order from Zoe, and we got a couple of. There was already one there, and the question about dispensing, and they're waiting to be filed. But what you may notice is there's only 3 things there, and we actually we declared 3 records. There was already one there, so one of them's actually gone already. And what you'll find is if I pop into the customer service. There we go, for 2012, and we look in the Alfredo directory, you see this purchase order has gone all the way through. Okay, and that's because if we look at the unfiled records folder, I added a rule in here that says any purchase order that comes in, if the customer ID is Alf, no, it has to go in the Alfredo folder. Okay, and I don't know if any of you noticed, I set that customer ID to Alf. Okay, so it's kind of an example of how, you can start to set up, the records manager has the control to set up the rules to kind of ease the burden of filing these things. Inevitably, they're going to have to sort some of them out because there's going to be things that require individual attention. But you can imagine the vast bulk of these records flowing into them can be automatically kind of filed away. Okay, press the wrong button. So I did say it was a prototype. And in actual fact, in the process of creating that record, we've actually extracted some of the information. So it means I can actually declare that as a record straight away. Okay. So again, you can imagine one of the big steps, if you like, in T0 is having to receive the record and then add the additional information before you can declare it. You know, with this new rule kind of chaining, it gives you an opportunity to actually pull information out automatically and pass that stuff in. So we can declare that, and then we can actually, at the moment, I'm sorry, not filing. We're actually going to just move it because we didn't have time to sort that bit out, and we can just move that into the particular company folder, and that's been shuffled off now. Okay. So hopefully that gives you a flavour for what we're trying to achieve in a more practical sense. How am I doing? Okay, not too bad. So the plan, the next step. So we've just released RM 201, I think literally last week, and that will work against the new community build, but it will also work all the way back to 401. And we'll continue to maintain that stream. I don't know that there's potentially going to be a 202, depending on sort of the demand. And then 2.1, which will target this functionality and try and get sort of the first steps of sort of transparency record management. We're targeting for sort of early next year. Roughly, I would guess, if I have to guess, I would say it will be soon after the 4.2 enterprise release. Okay, and it's likely that it will have a dependency of higher, so it will probably be dependent on 4.1 and above or whatever. Okay. Beyond that, we have plans sort of on the hit list after this. Composite records are probably another hot topic. If we can get those in, that will help us, that will enable us to do things like manage social records, manage conversations as records. So when you file a document from your collaboration site, if you've got comments on it, you know, they may come across with the record, because obviously that's kind of another hot topic in records management, is how do you deal with all the noise that comes around a piece of content? You know, how do you deal with the conversation in email? You know, how do you kind of record all of that and relate it? So composite records will give us a mechanism for doing that, and it means that we may be able to do some work around actually managing these social records. You know, things like, so looking after your business Twitter streams or your YouTube streams. You know, making sure that you can record what you're communicating to the world from effectively your corporate presence. Okay. We also have some plans to improve the share integration so that you can have multiple file plans and that the whole experience is much less seamless. It's a little bit clunky at the moment. Okay, but I could go on and on about the plan and what we could do, because so if anybody wants me to bore them to death about what we could do and records management, then please feel free to grab me, but I won't stop you getting to the party. Okay, so you know, I'm quite excited about this stuff. I actually think it's going to make a massive difference to the way that we can actually sell RM and how useful it's going to be. And hopefully people start to see this as an opportunity to actually kind of get out there and be able to, you know, sell this stuff and actually use this stuff for a lot more things than it is at the moment. Okay. So I don't know if there's any questions. I'm guessing maybe there won't be, because there's beers and dancing waiting. But I'm happy to take them now, or you can grab me after in the bar. Oh, yep. So in the world of Alfresco, if something becomes a record, and once it becomes a record, it's subject to a different security, not pattern, what's the word, framework, okay, which is much more rigid than the framework you get in Alfresco Normal. Okay, so in Alfresco Normal, you have, you know, a certain number of roles in a site, for example, and you can choose to whether inherit or not inherit that information, you know, that permission down, and that's pretty much all you can do. And I think, you know, Explorer of old, you could, you know, choose certain users to have certain permissions, but that was about it. In records management, we have a concept called capabilities, which basically means that you can say, not only does this individual have permission to see or to edit this thing, but given that, do they also have the permission to execute this function? Okay, so that means you can create a role in a records management site that says anybody in this role can only freeze and unfreeze or edit the whole details of a record. Okay, so that means you can delegate the process of managing frozen records, for example, to a group of users, you know, and they still have to. And that would work for the records that they could read. Okay, so it's a combination of you know, functional capability plus permission. Okay, and that's kind of controlled by a role. Okay. I don't know. Is the honest answer. I guess it would depend on what the requirements were. Right. Yeah, I would guess so. I mean, because the other part of that, because obviously you've got the security kind of enforcements, and I forgot to mention, because the other part of security that's different in RM is that you can define read permission based on property values. So that's where you get this kind of like classified and for, you know, presidential eyes only. You can do all that kind of marking up documents. But if you're talking about like, so that's the security part. That's kind of like who can see what and who can do what to it. If you're kind of talking about its control of the document, its life cycle, you know, how long is it kept, where is it stored, you know, when is it destroyed, is it ever destroyed, then that falls in the remit of the disposition schedule, what we call the disposition schedule. And that's where you can, in that file plan structure, you can define kind of sets of life cycle rules that control how the records are managed. Okay, basically it controls the end. It's sort of a way of controlling the end of the life of a piece of content. You know, so you can say, you know, for tax reasons, I have to keep this for 7 years after the end of the financial year, and then it must be deleted. Okay.
And it's undeletable in the period of time.
Correct. Correct. That's right. And that's where this kind of extended security comes in. Okay, because we'll say, well, look, you know, if this has been effectively retained, you know, unless you have the capability to delete a retained object, which probably only the manager is going to have, you know, it cannot be deleted. Okay, and that is the whole point. Okay, that's the, you know, the kind of the golden rule, if you like, of electronic records management is, you know, you can't do something, you know, these things are kind of precious, literally. Okay, you know, if they can't be deleted, they can't be deleted. If they're frozen, they can't be touched. You know, and that's really, you know, what we have to try and achieve. Yeah. So. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So even if that administrator did have the permission to delete the object, even though it wasn't due for disposition, it would be recorded. And those records can, that audit can then in turn be made a record, which can be kept periodically and so on and so forth. Ooh. Let's dive in. Sorry. A site, so an entire site, effectively. Sorry. Right. Yeah. I think that's where perhaps this notion of a composite record might come in. You know, if you wanted to treat the site as a record, but the site itself is obviously made of, you know, lots of content, you know, then that may be a way of doing it. Where a composite record is, you know, a composite record is a record. It's a, you know, a thing that we can manage as an individual record, but it potentially be made up of, you know, shards of other content. You know, I mean, that's probably an extremer example, but you know, a simple example might be just kind of like, you know, the comments that were associated with that document, for example. But I think that's how you do it, rather than, because you're kind of in that situation that the site is the record, right? You know, it's like a snapshot of it. That's what it was when it was there. Okay, so I think that's how you would treat it. I don't know if you, yeah. Oh, sorry, that was, yeah, sorry, Paul.
So when you file it, the person handling the purchase order clearly wants to place it in the D1 repository. When it was filed, it's then put in a place in the library. I take it those are both linked to the same object.
Correct, yeah.
So it exists in both places.
Yeah. So what happens behind the scenes is when a document becomes a record, its ownership is moved from its original location. I mean, it's literally moved from its original location into the file plan, because by doing that, it's then under the control of the records management team. It has all the security. It has the disposition schedule if it's appropriate. Okay, so it's precious from that point onwards. But what we do is obviously we create a secondary link back so that the individuals can still see it, and then we do some kind of pseudo munging of the permissions, so that, because obviously that Michelle was never a member of the records management site, so she has no records management permissions. So we have to take a snapshot of who could read it at that point and kind of give them like a snapshot view of this thing without kind of, you know, putting in a back door that people can do things they shouldn't. Okay, so it's kind of like a read-only snapshot of, you know, it's almost like a ghost image, if you like, of where your document was, but to the user it looks like it's the same thing. And that's why they could, if they decided that they didn't want to see that record in their site anymore, in principle we can have an action that just says, you know, hide the record, and it will just go away, and that secondary link will be broken, and it's now the records management sort of team's problem. Yeah.
How much can we use records management as a base of our own records management applications versus using it as a very big product?
Well, that's a good question, actually. And it's not something I've touched on here, but the whole principle, so the records management implementation is a bog standard Alfresco AMP extension. Okay, we don't do anything special. You know, effectively, I'm pretty much in the same boat as you guys, because, you know, I have a dependency on a particular version. I use all the techniques that we tell you guys to use. You know, I use AMPs, I use a content model, you know, behaviors and policies, all the share extension stuff. Okay, but what I do is it's probably a little bit more expansive than most people would do. So when we do have, you know, you can imagine there's logic around disposition schedules and freezing and policies and all that kind of stuff. So we will then order, you know, things into services in exactly the same patterns as we would if we were doing it in the repository, in the services layer. So the idea is that what you end up is, if you apply this thing as a developer or as a, you know, systems integrator or whatever, you've basically just got an extended Alfresco repository. Okay, you don't have to use the UI. In principle, you'll have a number of services and ultimately a number of REST APIs that you can just use, and we'll have, you know, free services, disposition services, extended security services. Okay, so we, you know, we're probably like 50% towards that vision, but as we kind of add these new features, we're churning behind the background to try and eventually make this thing something that you know, partners can take and implement, you know, a MoRec 2 quite easily, for example, or implement something for another vertical, you know, and actually sell that in that marketplace. So it's the same principle we use for Alfresco, making a toolkit, but also something that's useful out of the box that you can customize. So, yeah. Sorry.
Yes, the question is, maybe can you just file files?
Yes.
Or can other content types in the share even be filed in the records management?
Yeah, anything can be filed. Yeah. Yes, in principle, it's just just a node. Yeah. Yeah, in principle, yeah.
Everything which is a node can be filed.
In principle, yeah. The only thing we possibly don't support at the moment is filing a folder, and that's when we need to get into this idea of a composite record, because we have the notion of a record folder, but that's kind of a special container for a group of records that you may want to control as a batch, effectively as a cluster. And then the composite record kind of says, well, the record itself might be broken down into, you know, a set of things that make it. So.
Can you change the place of the physical file on the physical underlying file system to a warm configured disk storage?
I don't know. Not probably. Yeah, I was going to say. Yeah, I don't think that's in the remit of records management. That's what I was going on. Because so, yeah, I think it depends how you configure your content stores, right?
This one can be list-based warm configured
Yeah. I think that kind of falls into the remit of, because the thing is, one of the powerful things about this is that, again, we just layer on top of everything that's there. So we're just using the normal content store, the normal node service, normal search, and we just kind of skim with our extra RM functionality. So if you can pretty much, if you can do it in, you know, normal Alfresco, you could probably do it in RM.
Just to add on what they force us to really make the physical pipelines integral to.
Well, we can deal with that as well, because we actually put a, I can't remember what version, but it's one of the, must have been one of the 4.0 versions. We actually added a hook point in, or Derek added a hook point into the content store that allows you kind of like a callback before it's deleted. And obviously in that callback, you can do the multi-swiping to whatever, you know, algorithm you're required to. So again, you know, we're building on top of, you know, the standard stuff, and so again, that doesn't necessarily fall in, in our remit, but it means that we, you know, that hook point's there. So, you know, we work pretty closely with the repo team and the services team, you know, and try and get as much pushed into the core product as we can. You know.
There's a US-based customer that's using purpose order. Not in the context of so it's just another content store that was using it for. Another comment is just the ability to automatically declare space compile insurance is really a huge move in the right direction, because any customer that's in a highly regulated industry, every piece of content in all that sort of sometimes a lot of buildings. So to automate that process is extremely important.
Okay. Is there anything else? Oh, well, yeah, go ahead. Yes. Yeah, yes. Well, it's easy to say yes because we haven't done it yet, but I say yes because that is part of the architectural vision. At the moment, from a functional perspective, if you're looking at the services, everything's quite tightly knit. So in order to file something, you can't place something under a disposition schedule without filing it. You can't freeze something unless it's a record. And what we want to try and do is kind of strike those services, because a number of people say, like, I've had people say to me, I just want to freeze stuff, you know, and not have it go anywhere. Or I just want to apply a disposition schedule but not file it. Okay, so I just want to classify it, but I don't want to file it, and so on. So I think, you know, it's a harder thing to kind of, if you like, sell in terms of, you know, as Alfresco engineering, we should do it because, you know, visually we get very little from it. But as we kind of progress with the kind of the features that we need to kind of, you know, get traction for the product, I think architecturally that's the approach that I'd like to take, is kind of, you know, make sure that these things are more, so that, I mean, you can then pull in the RM kind of, or the RM suite, if you like, and pick and choose the bits that you want to use. And I think that will satisfy a lot more people in the longer run. Anything else? Or are we going to adjourn to the club? Okay, all right, well, thanks very much. And,